Morning, everybody. I can just see there's a few more people coming in through the waiting room, so I'll just give it a minute until we've admitted everybody through. If you can just bear with us. And I think that's just about everybody. So yeah, morning everyone, and welcome to the First Steps to Flexible Learning open meeting. The first open meeting on First Steps to Flexible Learning. I'm going to be handing over to Professor Dan George shortly, who will be leading the session for us today. We have had quite a lot of pre-submitted questions, as we often do for these kinds of meetings, and we very much want to get through as many of those as we can today. And also, of course, focus on questions from our virtual audience. So if you do want to ask a question at any point, do just use the raise hand feature in Zoom, and then we can come across and take your question live at the session. So I should just say, actually, I'm here rambling on. My name's Kim Grockier. I'm the Head of Student Comms. If you've come to some of the other TNL open meetings, you may be used to seeing my face around these parts now. So yes, thank you for joining us all. And Dan, I will hand over to you.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, everyone. Thanks very much for coming to the open meeting, and thanks very much to all of the people who have submitted the questions as well. We're not going to go around the panel. We've got a great panel. They are teaching and learning leads across the university. So I'll introduce myself, Dan George, as Associate Vice President for Blended and Flexible Learning. And then, like I say, we've got teaching and learning leads across the university who will introduce themselves as they answer some questions as well. So thanks very much for all of the questions. I just want to do sort of a quick introduction, and then I've got one slide to go through, and then we'll open it up for all different questions as well. So the reason we're doing this is we'd like to get as much input as possible from colleagues across the university to inform a paper that's going to go to Senate later this month. And that's about our first steps to flexible learning. So we've been to lots of meetings so far this year. We've been trying to be to as many meetings as that would have us: school boards, open meetings, faculty meetings, leadership, the Students' Union, and we've still got some to go before that Senate meeting in April. But we also wanted an open meeting like this for those who couldn't attend any of those meetings so far as well. The questions that we've already had and the questions you'll have today, all of those and the answers to them will form this paper. So we want as much discussion as possible today. So the Our Future Vision that came out early last year set the direction of travel for us as a university, and that was towards increased flexibility through blended and flexible learning. And so the Flexible Learning Programme, the FLP, is a project that's been spun up to explore our path to flexibility. And at the minute, when we talk about flexibility, we're talking about pretty much every meaning of the word, and that's for our students and our staff as well. So what we'd like to talk about today is setting out some pragmatic first steps in that direction based on the things that we've learned over the past year teaching during lockdown for our on-campus programs. So we know some things have worked really well, some things not so well. We know that students and staff want to get back to teaching on campus, but we also know that students and staff have really valued that flexibility that teaching online has provided. And while there are some people who haven't really felt comfortable with it at all, it's very new, others have found it transformed their teaching and brought flexibility to their ways of working as well. So this is listening about a huge variety of feelings and opinions in this area and making some good, solid first steps towards embedding flexibility in the way we teach. And then once we've done that, understanding how fast and how far we want to go in that direction. At the heart of this really is a change of mindset. It definitely is not about dictating a particular way in which everything should be done, nor is it about outlawing certain kinds of teaching. It's much more about shifting our assumptions away from the way we've always taught, and assuming that, you know, sometimes the large amount of hours that we have in face-to-face lectures is the default and the best model for teaching. It is not about saying we don't do X or Y. It's much more about having a framework that supports and encourages us to do the things in the best way we can, and not just assuming that the way we've done lectures and the way we've delivered them for hundreds of years, it should be the way we teach forever. Two practical things. First, what we've done over the past year isn't blended learning. Maybe we wanted it to be, but it's ended up being much more about online learning. Blended learning, by definition, brings together the best of online and that in-person teaching. And that's what we want in the future. Secondly, although we might hope that by September we can be back on campus, we definitely can't guarantee it. Maybe it's going to be socially distanced, focusing on more important face-to-face stuff. And many of you will have heard information about sort of remote teaching, etc. And we need to try and plan for different outcomes here as well. So what we're talking about is the future of flexible learning. So we know we've got some immediate issues that we're dealing with in terms of remote study because borders aren't opening, etc. But this is much more, what do we want to do as a university in the longer term from the things that we've learned in the past, and moving towards more flexible and blended learning as well. So first point, what we're recommending is that programs offer a blended portfolio. So you might have some course units that are totally traditional lectures because that's the right way of doing things for that topic, or because there are practical constraints. You might have other units that are fully online and others that are fully on campus as well. But overall, what we'd expect to see is at the program level is a blended approach. This isn't about demonizing lectures, but it's not about venerating them either. It's about removing any stigma that study done online is somehow second-class learning, because we know it's not. In practice, this really, in many areas, this really means a shift towards some flipped teaching. So that material that's explanatory, that you might otherwise repeat year after year, gets moved to video or reading material or animations, etc., with the time freed up in the live sessions focusing on active learning activities. And we know there's several bits of the university that are doing this already really, really effectively. So there's lots of seminars, there's lots of small group activities, which is great. We're not suggesting you change that, at least not without significant extra resource. What we've learned from online teaching this semester is that it requires much more clearer framework and signposting than you'd get away with a fully on-campus program. Here we're proposing timetabling even the asynchronous activities. And that's so that students know there's at least one pattern for the week that covers what they need to do. And we're also proposing to be clearer about the study budget associated with every single course unit as well. So how many hours you should spend doing X or Y. And finally, we want to bolster and follow up the work that's been going on about being clearer about learning outcomes and making sure that activities and assessments are clearly linked to well-informed learning outcomes, with plenty of opportunities for students to rehearse their skills and knowledge in formative ways before they are summatively assessed. So today, what we'd like to know is what's good about this, what's bad about this, and what would we need to give you in order to make it happen as well. Now, many of the questions that we've had so far are telling us what's good and what's bad about this, and we'll go through some of the answers to these as well. What we've tried to do is group the submitted questions. So there's a few that are very similar. We're trying to sort of group them once together. If we don't get to your question today, then we will definitely be following up. So we'll make sure that all of the questions, whether that's live today or the pre-submitted ones, will have answers to them, and we'll make sure that they're all shared with everybody to see. So I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to put up the first lot of questions. Just whilst we get up those questions, I'd just like to, again, just make that distinction between remote learning and some of the things that we're going to have to do, or some of the things we're doing this semester and next academic year, semester 1. And what we're talking about here is flexible learning, blended learning as a sort of a strategy for the university as well. So programs will be in touch about what's happening for semester 1, and some of the things that we're going to have to put in for semester 1. This is much more about the longer term. What do we want to see when we're allowed to actually deliver blended learning? Okay, I'll pass over to Kim. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. That's great. So yeah, we'll dive into the pre-submitted questions, but as I said, it'd be great if we get some questions from the room as well. So as we're going through any of this, again, please do use the raise hand feature, and we can come across to your question. But we'll start off with one of our pre-submitted questions from Dave Gerard, which is around copyright on teaching materials. And I think, Steve, you might want to come in and answer this one.
I will. Hello, I'm Steve Petiver. I'm the university's academic lead for digital learning. So one of the things that we've been doing recently is as have most HEIs, in fact, is looking at revising the policy on recorded teaching material, which used to be called the policy on lecture capture, I think. So just to answer the things that are explicit in this question, who owns the copyright on teaching materials? That will continue to belong to the university, as is standard with pretty much any kind of job. So material that you make whilst under the employment of somebody, the copyright will typically belong to your employer. However, there are 3 major changes in the way that the policy operates compared to what's happened before, and these are to take into account concerns largely from staff that have been voiced over the years. So while the copyright does still belong to the university, there's a commitment from the university that material won't be used without permission in the event of industrial action. So something you've recorded won't be used to replace you whilst you take industrial action, for example. It won't be used after somebody has left, unless that person is happy for it to be used. And it can be shared in other ways on other platforms. So there are some requirements for it to be hosted on university platforms, but you can, in addition, host it on other platforms such as YouTube or whatever, with the usual caveats about respecting intellectual property that belongs to other people. So if it includes bits of video or text from elsewhere, then that might restrict what you can share. What, if any, forms of teaching material are allowed to release as open source? That's still an open question, I'm afraid. I don't think I have a definitive answer for that one. It is currently being looked at by the legal team as to what the process should be to make it straightforward to openly release teaching material, software, and so forth to the rest of the world. Dave, are you on the call this morning? And does that answer your question?
I'm not sure if Dave is on the call actually, but thank you. I'm sure, hopefully that has answered the question. And Dave can, of course, follow up with us if he's got something further to add. Okay, so come on to the next question. And I think, Steve, we'll probably stick with you to take this one, if that's okay. Sure. So do we have a pedagogic foundation for understanding appropriate flexibility? And this is from Jacko Renkin. I hope I've got your name there correct, Jacko.
Yeah, I'll have a go at taking this one as well. So the too much flexibility can be bad. Yeah, very much so. I mean, one of the things that we've spotted in terms of talking to students over the past year is that while they really value having asynchronous material that they can choose to study in their own time, they also easily get lost, which is why we're suggesting having sort of like a notional timetable for when they do things, so that we can show here's a pattern of activities that can definitely work for you. In terms of the pedagogic foundation, one of the first things that the program is doing is setting up an advisory group. So we'll be approaching people who've got experience of doing flexible learning, blended learning from seed to form part of that advisory group, so that we can make sure that we've got the sort of the pedagogy right, as well as dealing with some of the pragmatic stuff. What we're planning to do there is to have sort of a core advisory group that will meet, I was going to say in person, but I guess I mean live, plus an online, a broader group that anybody can opt into joining. So that's our plans in terms of dealing with the pedagogy. Flexibility for what and for whom? Students and staff. And right now it's in all possible interpretations of flexibility. So flexibility in terms of pace, place, style of teaching, where you are when you consume it, and so on and so forth. Does that cover your question, Jaco?
Thanks. To some extent, Steve, it does. But I'm still a little bit concerned about the fact that it feels a little bit like we're starting at the wrong place in not giving a very good rationale for the flexibility that is based on some sort of evidence other than the incidents that we've seen over the last year or so. And I'm concerned that some of the terminologies that we are using and so on are really it's literally responding to students not being able to come over here, students wanting to work in their own time and stuff like that. So I'm very patient and in support of this, sure, more generally, very much so. But I'm just concerned that there's a bit of a knee-jerk going into this process, at least from the limited bits that we've been involved with. So
no, I can totally understand that. I wouldn't say it's a knee-jerk. I mean, some of this stuff was put in place pre-pandemic, so the kind of the plan to move to a more flexible model predates the existence of the pandemic. But also there are inflexibilities built into the way we used to do things that are becoming impossible to manage. So, for example, as the student numbers have increased and the teaching estate has slightly shrunk, we've got ourselves into an almost impossible state of play with the timetable, where the timetable is now quite inflexible. We're pushing the limits of that. So something needs to be done about that, if nothing else, for example. So there are definite pressures that are not just to do with the pandemic. But at the same time, I think it's also sensible to try and capitalize on some of the things that we've learned. And I can see how it does feel a little bit cart before the horse, and maybe there's some elements of that in the background which we need to be careful about. But many of these things do predate the pandemic as well.
Can I just come in on that one as well, Steve, from a humanities perspective, because Jaco is a humanities person. So what we plan in terms of humanities is we will be asking you about where that flexibility sits. So it will be about you deciding whether or not your lectures are interactive lectures and therefore kind of would carry on campus, or whether or not they are largely didactic kind of lectures and therefore would be more appropriately delivered online. So this isn't kind of going to take away your opportunities for you to decide. And it might be, if timetabling allows us to do this, that it's some lectures are online and some lectures are on campus. So it is trying to actually let the pedagogy and let academics as well drive some of this.
Thanks everyone for those questions. So we've got a few hands up now. I will come across to Roger first, who I think was first in queue with his hand there. Roger Harrison, if we can come across to you, please.
Hi, thank you. I'm from the Division of Public Health Teaching and was one of the early people who set up the PGT program, which was fully online distance learning program and now has become more of what people refer to as a blended approach for some of the units. Just to follow on from the last question, we've been sort of pushing the university for at least a decade to develop something like this framework now, which is moving on. And I think it's brilliant that it is looking at what's happened in the past year or so. But I also think it's really got to focus very much on the opportunities that many of us have found from using more technology. And we've had students from just short of 200 countries who otherwise wouldn't have been able to get their qualification. And the evidence from randomized controlled trials, certainly in healthcare and other types of evidence, is compelling that good pedagogically designed online and blended learning is as effective, if not more effective, than more of the traditional approaches. So as you can guess, I'm a fully supporter moving in this direction. My question is, I wasn't clear if this is just for UGT, and is it going to look at PGT and PGR, and of those programs which are already online learning? And my other query is, why can't UGT develop fully online programs as well?
I'll take that one. Thanks, Roger. So this is UGT and PGT courses on our on-campus programs. So it's not looking at the UMW courses or any of the other distance learning or remote learning courses we have. Could we have completely online UG courses? I think that would be really interesting to explore, actually. And something that, again, it's extremely embryonic, but something that I'd like to try and pilot across different areas is sort of like an online twin of something that we have on campus. So if you can do it, and of course we can't do it for all programs, but if we could get some pilots where, you know, there's not huge amounts of specialist teaching room activities, so laboratories, workshop areas, etc. But could you create an online twin of an on-campus course and then give the student the option of, do you want to come on campus and get all of the other great stuff that you get on campus, you know, and the social side and residences and everything, or because it's better for you from, you know, your own personal reasons to completely study online? Either way, you're going to get great teaching and learning. So I'd really like to explore that, and we're just trying to identify some possible pilot areas across the 3 faculties at the minute.
Thanks, Roger, for that great question. We've got a few hands up, so I'll come next in line to Aravind. If you want to go ahead with your question, please.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Well, I had a main question, but I just want to add a supplementary first because we had this discussion about copyright. So I was wondering where the university stands on lecturers using material developed for teaching externally, like if we are invited somewhere to give a presentation or something like that. Are we allowed to use slides and content that we have developed for online teaching in those circumstances? Secondly, this is the main question I had. Again, academics have spent an extraordinary amount of time. It's not unusual for us to have spent, 5 times what we normally would spend on developing each lecture for the online delivery as compared to what we would for in person. Is it going to be allowed that we use the material that we've already developed over the course of the last year for delivering this blended learning going forward? Are there going to be different standards, different requirements compared to what we currently have, or will the quality threshold or whatever be such that bulk of the material that we've already developed can be used going forward, including recordings of lectures?
Shall I pick this one up?
Yeah, please.
So on the first one, I can't see any reason in terms of reusing material that you've created yourself for external talks. I can't see any reason why that would be a problem, unless I'm missing some really subtle point of copyright. But I think that's a straightforward yes. In terms of reusing material that's been created this year, that's a definite yes. And in a way, what we're trying to get approval for here, in a way, is to shift the assumption that doing traditional lectures is the default to doing blended is the default. That doesn't mean reuse your material forever, but because I suspect our standards will change over time as we get better at doing it. But absolutely, reuse material that you're comfortable with for next year, if that works, and then build on it as we get better. And also as the university gets better at providing support and systems and software and help to produce better quality material. So in order to get the sort of the financial bit in place, to put in place a service that will support us in making better quality material over time, we need to know that that's the direction that we want to go in, and that's kind of what we're trying to establish here.
Can I do a quick follow-on, please?
Fine by me.
I just wanted to ask, so is there going to be then a blanket policy that any material or any lectures recorded over the pandemic can be reused, or are there going to be some quality thresholds either set by the university or based on student feedback or whatever as to what can be used or what might need to be modified and so on?
I don't think I can comment on that, and I certainly wouldn't want. I can't imagine that there will be a blanket policy. I suspect there will be a spectrum of stuff, some of which probably isn't sensible to reuse, ranging through to stuff that is definitely sensible to reuse. I think that probably has to be a local decision in the short term. It certainly can't be some. I don't think you can meaningfully define a policy at university level that will determine that.
Yeah, agreed. So I don't think there'll ever be a policy on that, but there probably will be guidance on, you know, if you're going to make a 50-minute lecture into some videos, here's some great ways to do it. And I know the 3 faculties have got lots of information out already on that. So there'll be guidance to help you, I think. But as Steve said, it's probably more of a local decision. There will not be a policy on it.
Thanks for that question. So we're about half an hour left on the event. We still have a few hands up, so hopefully we can get through everybody. If we come across next to Helen Chilton for your question, please.
Hi there, I'm a lecturer in deaf education. I think there's a comment and then a question, if that's all right. The comment is just to say that for the programme that I lead, actually we've always, it isn't really first steps to flexible learning. So that really worries me that we title it as that way, because we already have a fully e-blended programme, excuse me, and an on-campus programme, and part-time and full-time, and students are able to switch between those things, and we've kind of had this sorted for about 15 years. So that's the first thing, just to say that. So I wonder whether actually there's just a scope for programs to say, this is our local offer, this is what your options are, learners, so that you can understand how those things might look for you. That's the first thing. And certainly saying things like, you know, the asynchronous things should be timetabled. That really doesn't work for our e-blended learners. That's kind of not quite how our e-blended works. It works very well for our on-campus, and we've been teaching our on-campus on Zoom, obviously, since this pandemic kind of started. So that's kind of the first comment. The big question that I have is more about e-learning support, because we've run a fully e-blended version of the programme. And what I've found since Corona, and obviously everybody's creating materials and doing all these different things, that actually the support for our e-blended programme isn't particularly there, because e-blended e-learning technicians are so stretched across everybody now. So I think if we're all going to move in this direction, bearing in mind that our e-blended students only come in twice a year, then actually, you know, then they're not taking up space in lecture theatres, they're not using everything else, all the other facilities that are on campus. So my concern would be that actually the service and the provision for those learners who've chosen fully blended, not because of Corona, because that's what they always would have done with us for the last 15 years. You know, how are we going to secure that resource and support?
Okay, I'll take that one. Thanks, Helen. It's really great to hear you've been doing lots of flexible learning for years. It sounds like there's loads we can learn from you. So you'll be hearing from us for sure. I mean, the fact is that as a university, we haven't been doing lots of blended and flexible learning as an entire university. There are some great pockets around, and obviously you're in one of them. So this is much more about sort of giving everyone that this is the way now for everybody, and it's not to stop people innovating and going even further. Brilliant if people are going even further with it, but it's just to get that sort of baseline across the entire university. That's our plan with this as well. timetabling the asynchronous activities, if that's an issue for a specific type of program, then we won't do it. You know, that's fine as well. And again, this is just where it works. That's what we'd like to see. And one of the reasons we'd like to see that really is just for some of the feedback that we've had from students in the past couple of semesters, where for all the right reasons, you know, all of us as lecturers have sort of gone, right, well, this is a new way of teaching for many of us. So we're going to add some quizzes along the way just to make sure they're okay, because I'm not seeing them face to face. And we've overwhelmed the students for all the right reasons, but we've overwhelmed them. If we then timetable the asynchronous stuff, we can look at it and go, you know, as a program, and go, right, this is okay. This actually fits in a working week. So we're not overloading the students, and that's really the reason to do it. If there are programs where it just doesn't work, that's absolutely fine too.
So I think that would work. That's got on campus. That's kind of a response to students who would traditionally be on campus. You know, that they need to have that timetable in, or they expect to be learning on particular days. But certainly when we're talking about courses that have traditionally been designed, you know, the arm of our course that's been designed to be blended, that definitely doesn't work, because students really want to do this on a Saturday when they're not working. Or
for sure.
They want to do it at the times when they want to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And this isn't saying that, you know, if you put an asynchronous part at, you know, Tuesday at 10 o'clock, then students have to do it at Tuesday at 10 o'clock. It just means that it does fit in the working week, and they can do it there if they want. If they want to do it on a Saturday at midnight or wherever, then that's absolutely fine too. It's just showing that it will fit into the working week, and we're not expecting them to work at the weekends. They can if they want, but, you know, in terms of e-learning support, absolutely. I think this is the area that we do need to grow a lot. We've invested, I think it was about 22 e-learning technologists at the Flexible Learning Programme. So we got 22 new ones. That's about 10% of our e-learning support, and that was sort of spread across the 3 faculties and then into Ian's digital learning service as well. Is that enough? Probably not, I would say. You know, as you say, you know, as we're all moving towards more, we're going to need more and more sort of that digital learning service. So that could be sort of the first tranche that we've invested in. I would say we probably need to invest in more of that. Steve and Ian, you're heading up the digital learning service. Anything you want to add on that?
Oh, sorry, Steve.
No, go on in.
Yeah, I think you raised an excellent point, Heather. So Ian Hutt's head of digital learning. One of the areas that we're looking at is that whole issue of how we support our teaching staff in moving this forward. Obviously, we're asking people to potentially do things differently or do more in order to get this off the ground. We need to make sure that the correct software and systems are in place, that there is training and guidance on how to use that software, that we have the in-person support from e-learning technologists, potentially specialists who can help in areas like production of high-quality video. All of these things need to be addressed, and we have some excellent examples already across the university of this kind of thing happening. But as Dan says, probably not enough to cover our ambitions. So we are looking at how that is organised, how it's resourced, and what we can do in the future in order to provide better support in those kind of areas, or more of it.
Brilliant. Thanks. Loads of hands. Yeah, sorry, Kim. Yeah, we'll try and keep our answers a bit shorter. Sorry.
No, it's absolutely fine. And thanks again for that great question. And again, just to reiterate what Dan said, it's fabulous to hear that there's obviously lots of great work going on in this space already across the university. We'll come next to Alice Kay.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alice from the e-learning team in FSE, and it's kind of related to what Ian said. I was just wondering how or what plans are there to assess digital literacy skills, both for staff and students? And then if that gap is identified, how would that affect individual provision, say, in a program, in a teaching program? And also how would that gap be addressed kind of on a university level for staff, potentially?
Yeah, so I'll start this, and then Steve, I'll hand over to you. So I don't know if you know, but Jane Mooney she is in BMH, and as part of her fellowship for the Institute of Teaching and Learning, started some work on digital capability. She looked at a tool which I think some other people have looked at. I think the library looked at it a few years ago, from JISC, about assessing your digital capability. What we're going to do now is develop that digital capability tool from JISC, and we're looking to embed it for students in the first place in the welcome and induction. So in the sort of overall university welcome and induction, and welcome back for students then and put it in that to try and assess their digital capability. What we then need to do is see how much we need to change that for staff, because it would be really good to do it for staff as well. And then also, once we've assessed it, what do we then do to develop it? So that's sort of stage one, is to assess it using this existing tool and maybe tweaking it a bit. And then what do we do then? So what training, what development do we need to put in place for students and staff in their digital capability? But Jane Mooney's going to sort of report into Steve. Steve, is there anything you want to add?
No, I think that covers it, actually. I think that's pretty
okay.
cool.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alice.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alice. So we'll come on now to a question from Jonathan. Jonathan Sly, if you can go with your question, please.
Hiya, thank you. I think you've perhaps partly answered my question, because it was referring to this idea of timetabling asynchronous activities. And I'm still a little bit confused about that. And I think we may need to think about the terminology here, because surely as soon as you timetable something, it ceases to be asynchronous. And it sounds to me as though you are perhaps thinking of going a little bit beyond just formalizing the weekly learning plans that I know a lot of us have been, providing with our units at the moment. If that is the case, then I guess my comment, slight concerns are, first of all, it seems to be adding a whole new level of complexity to timetabling, which is difficult already if we're going to be synchronizing between units. And secondly, I think there is a danger that anything that actually adds stuff to a student's timetable, or appears to, is going to be interpreted by them as just us increasing the workload. We've had this to a certain extent already. So again, I think perhaps it's just thinking about the terminology and perhaps talking about study budgets is more useful than talking about moving stuff, asynchronous stuff onto a timetable.
Thanks, Joz. Steve is our timetabling guru, but Peter, you've got your hand up as well. Is it to answer this?
Yeah, because I think Jonathan raised a really good point. And I think there's a balancing act here. I think what must be our first priority is to know that we have credible study budgets for students. Yeah. We have clearly, in some disciplines in FSE, for all the good reasons you say, Dan, we've overtaught them in terms of the sheer hours. It's just not deliverable. One student had 60 hours in a week. Now, that said, though, I think there's a piece of work, and maybe it's for academic advisors. So I've certainly done it with my tutees, because different students will engage with the asynchronous material in different ways. One of my students always likes to do them early morning, and the other one likes to do them late in the day, but it's taken a couple of iterations to get to that sweet spot. So I think there's a piece of work for us to be done with some induction material, with academic advisors, to help students best engage with the asynchronous provision. But I think for me, first and foremost, we must have credible study budgets for all of our students.
Thanks for that question, Jonathan. Still got a lot of hands up here. I hope we can get through. I'll come across now to Jeff, who's next in line, Jeff Rubner. Hi, Jeff.
Hi there, I hope you can hear me. I'm Jeff Rubner from Electrical Engineering. I just wanted to add my 2 pence worth. I'm a believer, if you like, in the flipped classroom. I've been running a first year unit in the flipped style for several years now. And the weakness with the flipped approach, blended or whatever you like to call it, I think of it as flipped, is that this weekly cycle of asynchronous followed by synchronous activities is the major weakness, because students, particularly first year students, seem to lack the self-discipline to follow that on a regular basis. And even those that do, as soon as a coursework deadline comes along, that self-discipline goes out of the window. They become very selective about where to direct their energies and their efforts. and they will catch up, of course. But just think of it: if you miss an asynchronous lecture or you miss the asynchronous material, what's the point in coming to the synchronous session? So this is the explanation for why numbers, in my case, have sometimes hugely dropped off at particular points in the teaching cycle in the semester. So this is, I'm glad this is being raised, because this needs to be addressed. If you want students to follow this asynchronous-synchronous cycle, you've got to give them support, some structure. I don't know what the answer is. Maybe it's to give them some credit for completing the asynchronous material within the allotted time. Perhaps that's the carrot and stick sort of approach you need. Having said that, I want to just make a couple of other points, and that is, I think the idea of piloting online courses in parallel is excellent. That's a brilliant idea, I think. And the other thing about the points that Jaco and to some extent Helen raised was about the underlying pedagogic theory. I was able to spend a little time looking at that for the flipped classroom, and people in SEED, who are the educational psychologists, if you will tell you that there is not a very strong theoretical underpinning for the flipped approach. It's very popular, but to make it work, then you have to make sure those synchronous sessions really do add value to the to students, because, as I say, they're very selective. In a way, that helps to improve our teaching, because if you think about, preparing for a synchronous session, you really have to give thought to adding value and reason for students to want to attend it. Sorry, I've droned on, covered more than one point there, but I just wanted to chip in, that's all.
I'll pick that one up. Thank you, Jeff. I think there's lots of important points in that. I think some of the stuff about students choosing to do other things when there are other things to be done, that goes back to Peter's point about we really need to get our study budgets sorted out. And there's another problem that happens in lots of different ways when one course unit tries to do something that's different to the standard. And what we're kind of trying to do here is, I guess, shift that so that everybody is doing, or at least significantly more people are doing this kind of model, so that you don't have that kind of problem of, well, everybody else is doing a thing that demands that I am at a particular place at a particular time. And so that's the thing that gets my attention. If we can get more flexibility, then I hope that that problem will diminish, that we don't have those kinds of hotspots that we have had before, and where innovation is it's harder to do because everything else is doing it the old way, and everybody just carries on putting their attention where that is. So I think hopefully that will just change as a result of the shift. But I think the study budget aspect is absolutely crucial, and we're not very good at that at the moment. We have people are saying, well, I can't fit this into a week. You go, well, in that case, your course unit is the wrong shape. If you can't fit a week's worth of stuff into a week, something is bad about the program. And we can't just put that onto students' plates to say, off you go and sort out how you fit this into the week. At least we should be able to come up with one pattern where it definitely fits. And that is quite a timetabling challenge. But if we can't do it, we shouldn't expect students to be able to do it.
Yeah,
thanks for the question. Oh,
sorry, yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you. Sorry, apologies for chatting over you there. Moving on then, I can see we've got another kind of 6 hands here and just under a quarter of an hour. So hopefully we can get through. Alison Fisher, if we can come across to you for your question, please. Hi.
Hi, yeah, I'm a lecturer in psychology. I think I'm largely following on from Jeff. So to be brief about it, I think feedback from our students and also footfall from our students tells us they do not value our small group teaching. And effectively what you're suggesting in this blended model is that that's the in-person stuff, the small group active learning. And I recognise that that's because we're not doing it right. So I acknowledge that that's our problem, but what work is going to be done to get us ready to do it right? Because we don't even have our own experience of education to draw on here. So yeah, people have done fantastic work in this past year to teach themselves how to do it, but there's still a huge gap. And what we haven't had this year, yeah, we've got feedback to say students are doing well with the asynchronous learning or that they enjoy that, but we don't have feedback to say that they like the in-person small group stuff. And I worry that we're walking into a bit of a dissatisfaction thing. And the other thing about having all the small group teaching being the in-person offer is that for very large cohort programs, you've got the problem of that involving masses of repeats. And as soon as things involve masses of repeats, we don't necessarily have the right staff delivering. And I don't mean the right staff. Many of our staff, or all of our staff, have something valuable to contribute. But I can see lots of programs where that's going to be postgraduate students that are delivering those repeats. And so the real relationships that our students get to form with members of staff, yeah, it's not great that they used to be in a lecture, but at least they got to see that research expert in front of them. There was an in the room exchange with that person. So those are the kind of key challenges that I think, the work to do to get us ready to do this well, but also finding a way to ensure that our students recognise the value of it and get to know us.
I think that's really important points, Alison. Thanks. The small group teaching, you know, there's lots of it done and done very well, you know, in already without this move. So, you know, as an example, in humanities, Fiona, there's lots, isn't there, done already. And I think sometimes we're not brilliant at learning sort of internally from each other. And we need to maybe just get a bit better at that and sharing some of that, you know, that good stuff that's being done elsewhere. Oh, and there was what was the last thing you said? Sorry, I forgot it now, Alison, sorry.
Resources for small group teaching.
Oh, resources, yeah. So yes, resources is an issue. And I think if we, you know, there are some areas where if we make this shift, it's going to be a lot easier because we're talking about, you know, that sort of much more of that non-interactive didactic type teaching, shift that. Now, if that then leaves labs and, you know, lots of other things like that, well, you still have that contact with that lecturer. If it doesn't, then we do need to think about the resource that you'd need in order to shift, and we shouldn't make that shift until we've got the resource, because we don't want to make it worse for the students. There's also, you know, we're definitely not saying never do a lecture, you know, even if the majority of your course where you were doing traditional lectures is now asynchronous, you could still have that stand up, right, you know, lecture one, and everyone gets in the room at the same time, and it's much more of a like presenting sort of, this is what the course is going to be about, and I'm your lecturer, you know, and so you have that big sort of plenary type thing, and then you might do another one in the middle and one at the end, you know, so you can mix and match. It doesn't have to be all of the material gets shifted to asynchronous. If there are some really good reasons why you should still be doing that that big didactic lecture, then still do them.
Thanks, Alison, and thanks, Dan. So I can see we've got, oh, Judy, did you just want to come in there? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that to say, Alison, if there are areas that staff do need help and support with, through the Institute of Teaching and Learning, we can put on specific sessions. We can get experts in from across the country to help develop. And as Dan mentioned earlier, we're developing networks. So you heard from Helen earlier about her best practice that she's been doing in her course, bringing people together in networks to really support one another and learn from one another across the university. So if you're interested in that, please do drop me a line and we can get all of that set up for you.
Thanks, Judy. So we've got 5 hands still raised and 9 minutes. So we've probably got about 90 seconds per question and answer. And I can see, Aravind, you've got a second question, but if it's okay with you, I'll just take the other questions and then come back to you if that's okay. Thank you. Rachel Parker-Stark, if we can come across to you, please.
Hi, I'm just wondering if there is any sort of projects or work going on at university level to sort of prepare the students for this new way of learning. Sort of obviously about new cohorts, but also our current students, just to help them make the best of the opportunity, and sort of if there's anything going on at a bigger level rather than sort of the local level. I know we've touched on study budgets and academic advising, but is there anything from university level?
Yeah, Judy, you were nodding a lot. Do you want to?
Absolutely. I was going to say, do you want me to take this one? So I'm Judy Williams. I'm the Associate Vice President for Teaching, Learning and Students for Inclusivity and Engagement. So absolutely, yes, Rachel. And as Dan mentioned earlier, we're going to be putting a lot of effort into welcome, induction and transition. And that will help all of our students who are starting. And we're looking at creating pre-arrival support for our students so that they can get off to the best start as soon as they arrive at Manchester. But as you quite rightly mentioned, the students who are here need the support as well. And we're working very closely with My Learning Essentials that's delivered through the library so that we can upskill and enhance the skill set of all of our students. That's undergraduate, postgraduate taught and PGR as well.
Thanks, Judy, and thanks, Rachel, for that great question. We'll come across next to David Bohm. Hi, David.
Hi, I don't know if this is beyond the remit of this group or it's the invisible elephant in the room, but if we're going to go to new modes of flexible teaching and learning, we also need to think about assessment as well. So we've been thrown into this in terms of completely changing the way that we teach and the way that students learn. And we've had to adapt our ways of assessment. And I think it's not worked that well in terms of directly translating an exam-based assessment system from an in-person closed examination to an online system. We've seen a groundswell, for example, in academic malpractice, which our colleagues are struggling to cope with. We're also experiencing a problem with the amount of time that is required for our colleagues to deal with marking and assessment, to the extent that it's impacted on things like timing of examination boards. And it's something which is of great concern to me when we come to the June examination boards. And I'm just wondering if the university is looking into how modalities of assessment for this type of learning can be introduced or changed, and what type of support is going to be available, in particular software support, because quite honestly, the only tool we really have available is Blackboard, and it's not fit for purpose. It's not designed to do summative assessment.
Yeah, absolutely, David. It's not the elephant in the room. It is part of the flexible learning program. It's currently in the box that's really difficult at the minute, so I need to sort of lift it up and sort of bring it out of that box.
No kidding.
But it's sort of, this is very much just the first step, and the very quick next step has to be, you know, once we get this one done, the very quick next step has to be assessments. It is so important. There has been a group looking at it, like a task and finish group looking at it, and they did some really good work, you know, in the past couple of semesters. Quite a lot of it was trying things that we thought probably wouldn't work, you know, had issues, remote proctoring, etc. But, you know, we've tried them and we know how we feel about those things now. And so we know what we'd want to keep and what we need to change and what we want to try new, etc. So there is a massive piece of work that needs to be done on this for sure. And there was something else I was going to say and I forgot that as well.
Dan, what do you think? Can I come in?
Yes, of course.
So just to say, David, we're in humanities, we're about to run our third lot of exams entirely online because you know, in slightly different to the other faculties last year. I wouldn't say we've got it perfectly right, but we have done quite a lot of work to evaluate both student experience and staff experience of those exams. I think you had pre-submitted a question about this, and one of the things that I think you talked about was staff workload. One of the things that we've done in humanities is we've put quite a strict word limit now on the essay-based exams.
Yeah, we've
actually
done
very
this.
short, so it's 1,000 words we're kind of saying. To try, and we had that problem last year, I think, where students just wrote a lot and it was a piece of coursework, and we have to maintain that distinction between exams and coursework. I think what we haven't had masses of cases of malpractice, interestingly. I think partly because I think we have open book exams, we've tried to design it out as much as possible. And we haven't had such a major problem either with the overlapping exams. And that's partly because we've stuck with 7-day exams, where we're actually saying, well, if it's a 2-hour exam, it's 6 hours you should be spending on this, and you've got 7 days to do it, to try and minimize some of those things. So I wouldn't say we've got it perfect. We haven't cracked it, but I think we have made improvements each time we've run.
Yeah, it's always interesting finding out what is happening in other schools and faculties, and I think that discourse is missing to a certain extent. I think it was obvious when I looked at the examination timetable for the last semester, it was obvious that people had just gone completely different ways, and I was also pretty sure that some of the assessments were not flexible, and they certainly weren't ticking the accessibility box either. So that did concern me slightly. That wasn't the case with us, but we ran into our own problems. For example, we found exams that we didn't want timetabled over weekends, and we were very concerned about support. And again, it comes back to the infrastructure about e-learning support as well, which by and large I thought was very good given the amount of time and everything else that we threw into it.
Can I just do a little plug at this point, because Dave, you've raised a really important issue here around assessment and flexibility of assessment. And just to remind everybody that we have institute fellowships. So this is one area that we would highly recommend if you're wanting to investigate and really drive forward solutions for your area or solutions for the university. We'd really welcome applications for institute fellowships looking at online and blended assessment. The deadline for those is the 19th of April. So there's still time to put in and really help us really drive this forward.
Thanks, Judy. Great plug. And thanks, Dave, for the question. Okay, if we can go across, please, to Sarah Mallon. I am conscious of time, but hopefully we can, if we're okay, Dan, just to carry on with the last few questions.
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
Thanks.
just a quick one. I'm from Careers, so I'm just wondering, will there be any e-learning support and technology and technologists for non-faculty teams?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a really quick one. Thanks, Sarah. Yes, absolutely. And Ian can follow up with you for a bit more detail, but in a nutshell, yes.
Great, thank you. And then across to Marie-Claude Asselin. Hi, Marie.
Hello. In my program, a lot of students come from overseas, and with the online learning only, they've been allowed to stay overseas, which added the problem of the time difference, which was 8 hours with China, has now been down to 7 hours. So is the assumption of blended learning that all of the students will be in Manchester at all times, and this will not be an issue, but at the same time you're removing this flexibility of studying anywhere around the world?
Yes. So what we're talking about for these are blended learning for our on-campus programs, and they're called on-campus for a reason. So there will be activities that students will be needed to be here. If they want sort of a completely distance learning type approach, then we are developing more programs, through UMW and others, to look at distance learning programs. But for this, we're talking about our on-campus programs, and blended learning means, there has to be a face-to-face element of on-campus. Just to go back to what I was saying before about that sort of online twin, if there are some sort of online twins, they are the type of challenges we're going to have to overcome in terms of time zones, etc. But for this, we're talking about our on-campus program. So there would be an expectation that students would be here still.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marie-Claude, and thanks, Dan. And I know we're a couple of minutes over 12 noon, but if we can just flip back again to Aravind for your follow-up question. Thank you for waiting there.
No worries. I just wanted to ask, we were talking about support for e-learning. What about software? Because, I mean, this is actually a problem we face even now. There are things like Kahoot and Mentimeter, which are super useful for the synchronous sessions, but the free versions have some extremely annoying limitations. They are almost able to do what you want to do, but not quite, and it drives me nuts. So it would be really helpful if we can get some professional accounts, pro whatever, for some of these interactive tools that can support us with the teaching.
Yeah, absolutely. As you can imagine, software tools are a massive part of the flexible learning program, certainly in terms of time and budget so far. So, you know, Steve is looking at the digital learning environment as well. So, and Ian has done an awful lot on trying to make sure we've got some of the software we need in the immediate future, but we do need to look at what we need longer term as well. Steve and Ian, is there things you'd like to add? You guys are leading this.
I think that about covers it. So yes, Aravind, we absolutely recognise that the past year has thrown a spotlight on just how inadequate some of our tool set is when it comes to software, and we are looking at addressing that. So we've already put some new site licenses in place for the likes of Padlet, Piazza. We have a long list of other things that we are looking at. I don't believe Mentimeter is on there at the moment, but I'd be very, very happy to add it. But the point is that we're looking to develop a centrally supported tool set that will cover all of these needs across the university. It's going to take us a little while to get there.
Great, thank you everybody for today, and again thank you for patiently waiting there, Aravind, to come back for that second question. Dan, shall I just hand over to you for some closing words?
Yeah, just to say thanks very much, everyone. It feels like we need sort of a follow-up. We didn't get through any of the submitted questions. Some really great questions in the session. So so thanks very much. It will really, really help us to shape this paper. And, you know, again, some common themes coming out, which will make sure we capture, especially around sort of e-learning support, timetabling, etc. So yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. And just to add as well on those pre-submitted questions, that there was a lot that we didn't get through. We will be able to kind of answer those and write that up and then circulate those answers out to everybody that signed up for the session here today. So everybody that signed up will get to see all of those questions and answers. So thank you once again. And yeah, I look forward to the next one of these, the second Steps to Flexible Learning open meeting. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Everybody.